Hey kids, it's good to be back with you today for one of my magical lessons. I'm Pastor John, and today we'll be talking about how God watches over us and He takes care of us, meeting our needs. There's a very interesting example of God's care for us in 1 Kings, the 17th chapter, verses 9 through 16, which tells us the story of the great prophet Elijah and a poor woman whose husband had died. And she had a young son, and they were very much in need. The woman and her son lived in the region near Zarephath. And so the woman is known as the widow of Zarephath. Now, God had not allowed it to rain upon the land of Israel because of the people's sinfulness. He was trying to send a message to the sinful people, and particularly to the king and queen. This drought would go on for 3 years. But after the first year of this drought, where there was no rain upon the land, God sent Elijah to the widow of Zarephath. And when He sent her to him, or him to her, she was gathering sticks for a fire over which she would cook the last of the food that she had for her son and for herself, and then they figured they would just die. She would just be making some bread out of flour and out of oil. And when Elijah came to the region of Zarephath and met this widow, he asked her for a drink of water, which she got for him. And then he asked if, kind of as a test of her faith, whether she would share with him the bread that she was going to make for the last of her flour and out of the last of her oil. Elijah told her that if she gave this expression to her faith in God, that God had told him that God would not let her oil or the flour fail during the whole time of the drought that would last upon the land. Now, we know that the drought is going to last 2 more years, but at this point, she has no idea how long that drought would last. The widow did not have much. She just had a little flour and a little oil, but she had a lot of faith. And so she shared her bread with Elijah. And to illustrate, I've brought a little container here of some flour. And what she did is she took the flour, and I'm going to put it here into this mixing bowl so that you can see what's happening. But I'm going to take the flour and just going to dump it right here into the mixing bowl. There it is. That's it. And then we'll take the oil and we'll up in that too. That's it. And she mixed it up. She cooked it over the fire. She gave it to the prophet and her son, and she shared the bread together. The next day, the woman took what was now her empty container of flour and dumped it into so I got flour all over me. Dumped it into and then took her empty oil, which also wasn't empty, and dumped it in. And then she made again some bread and flour for herself and the prophet. And then the next day, she went to her empty container and discovered it still wasn't empty. And she went to her oil, and it wasn't empty either. And then the next day, she went to her empty, and it wasn't empty either. And the next day, she took the oil and dumped it in. And then, as you can see, this is going to go on day after day. For the next couple of years, she's going to go to her flour, and it will not fail. And she's going to go to the oil, and it will not fail. Day after day, she comes, and there's the flour. And she comes to the oil. Now, you thought that was the end of the flour, didn't you? And I don't have any more flour left. Just know what you're thinking. And you would be wrong. There was more flour. God was not going to let the widow down. And there's more oil as well. Be sure. The flour? Are we out? Of course not. The oil, are we out? Of course not. God can be counted upon. Now, God's going to send Elijah, his prophet, and confront the prophet Elijah, or to confront King Ahab about his sin before the drought could be ended. But that's a story for another day. Today, what we need to remember is we can trust God and have faith in Him, and He will watch over us and care for us and help us in our needs. You know, the world can be a difficult place sometimes, and much of the difficulties is caused by sin. Maybe not yours, but somebody else's. And by people ignoring God and just doing their own thing. When everyone does what they want to do, instead of doing what God has told us that will make for a good life, then there's going to be trouble of one kind or another. We need to remember, sin is always destructive. But life is always with God. So trust God and follow Him, and He will provide for you. He'll care for you, just as He did for the widow of Zarephath. God bless.